Would you walk away from $15,000 if it meant gaining $100,000 in value? Today we're talking about grants, concessions and government schemes, but with a twist.
Because while they sound great, and they can be great, they also come with limits. And these limits might be holding you back and costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars in the long run.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to become educated home buyers.
I'm Veronica, and that was Megan. We're two of Australia's most experienced buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum, which is a good thing because between us, we've got almost 50 years experience to share with you, and together we're going to cut through the BS and make sure that you're well informed so you make better decisions.
When you get to the end of this episode, make sure you check out the show notes where you can get links to download our 2 free resources. A mini course to teach you how to price a property like a professional, and a webinar to help you become educated about buying your home with the right amount of debt. And remember to subscribe to the podcast.
But before we get to the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We have done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant authorities and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
We've invited a special guest to help us unpack this. He's a seasoned mortgage broker who's helped loads of first home buyers think outside the square when it comes to these schemes. Welcome to the show, Andrew Wheatley.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Veronica. Really happy to be here.
Now, full disclosure, Andrew is on our panel as a recommended mortgage broker, and that's because he focuses on first home buyers and really knows his stuff. And, you know, we're looking forward to this conversation because this is about conversations and about conversations with experts. And this is what we try to encourage you. Our very first step in your first home buyer guide is to surround yourself with the right support crew, right? And Andrew's a good example of the type of broker that first home buyers should be talking to, those who will have bigger conversations with you and really look at things from different lenses, but also look at the long term. All right. So we're looking forward to this conversation.
I'm really looking forward to it as well, because as all the conversations we have, I think we're on the same track. So let's get started. Let's get some
Give us the quick going. Andrew Wheatley overview. Let us know where you are, what you specialise in, where you service, who you service, just so people can look you up if they need to.
Yeah, so I'm the owner of Wheatley Finance. It's a mortgage broking business based in Melbourne. We have clients all over Australia. We do lots of different things really well, but in this particular instance, with first-time buyers, I think what we're especially good at is being able to have those good conversations and I guess give a framework, like take simple, complex things and explain them in a simple way so that people can make better decisions, right? If you get clear information and good information, you're going to make a better decision, like a better decision than I'll make. Like, I don't know what's the best house for you or how much you should spend, but I can definitely help you be able to work it out better.
Great. Look, we've done a number of episodes on grants and incentives. We're not going to go over them specifically. That's not what this is about. We aren't against them, but we are against the way they limit buyers from potentially buying a better quality property.
Yeah, we do see this a lot. So, Andrew, there are a bunch of government incentives floating around from federal to state, right? You've got first home guarantee, you've got first homeowner grant, stamp duty concessions, et cetera, et cetera. But what is the trap that most people fall into?
Yeah, so I agree. They're great. Like anything the government's going to do is great. You can use it or not use it. I'm all for it, right? But in particular, I guess around the stamp duty concessions it can get a bit misleading for people, right? And the most common one is looking at the number where you pay no stamp duty, because that's kind of all you ever hear people talk about. Oh, Queensland, no stamp duty up to 700,000. Victoria, still show you
that out in our agency business.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence that when I talk to first time buyers and I say, what purchase price are you looking at? they almost always come back and go, oh, 600,000.
Yeah.
Right. And if the conversation ended there, like if I was basically like an order taker, which we get across a lot of industries, and just went, oh, okay, right, here's, you earn enough money, okay, pre-approval, go buy for 600,000. Like, in one way, I've done my job, right? But what we're going to talk about now is how to do that a bit better, right? So the missing piece is that, again, there are a lot of people who think that number, no stamp duty under that number, and as soon as you go $1 over, massive stamp duty.
Yeah.
That's not the case, right? So as soon as you understand that, you're going to be able to make a lot better decision.
Because what you're talking about there, like for example, in New South Wales or in Sydney, it's 800,000 up to that. You have no stamp duty, and then it's sort of a sliding scale up to $1 million where you start paying full stamp duty. So that means you have reduced stamp duty at every price point between 800 and $1 million. Now, obviously, 990, you're going to be paying almost full amount of stamp duty, but maybe a $900,000 purchase is still a substantial saving on stamp duty, but you still have to pay some. And so I guess that's something that you're talking to here, is that everyone had this cutoff as the bottom price, but they're not realizing that there could be some low-hanging fruit perhaps, or maybe some opportunities in that price bracket between the cutoff and the bottom the bottom threshold.
Yeah, exactly. And so I can't tell people, again, what's the right property to buy, but what I certainly do see, like what the market's telling me, is when I give clients some examples to say, like, right, okay, I'll just use Victoria as an example because, it's the one I do most of. So you're right, 600,000, no stamp duty. Here's what you can borrow. Here's what your repayments will be. Bang. However, if you bought for 610,000, all right, your stamp duty will be $2,000, right? If you buy for 630, your stamp duty will hit 6.5. Right. Now, normally that would be like 30,000. So you're getting a massive discount. And so what I would say to people is, look, go and look at all the places for 590, 600. Just check some out. 810, 820, 830, or 850, whatever. And just see, like, how much better are they? And would you pay that much extra to own that property? Right. And that's partly from, I guess, you just might get to a suburb that you like a bit better or a better property. But in the bigger picture, and you ladies know this much better than me, you've got more chance of getting a better quality asset. And while that sounds very an asset, about a property.
So you've said it well. You've said it well, Andrew.
Because I would love it if the most important thing in this whole process was the mortgage, and I'm the main character, I'm the superstar, and that is all right. But it's genuine. It is not, and anyone that tells you so is does not know what they're talking about. The mortgage is important, right? But if you had say you get the mortgage with, it could have been a better bank, could have been a slightly better rate, could be whatever. Like, you're not stuck. Like, it's not that hard to get out of it.
You can just that.
Yeah, the worst thing could be you might get stuck there for a few years, or you might be able to move straight away. You buy the wrong property. I mean, it's not going to ruin your life, but it's a big setback. It's very expensive, very stressful to get out of that property. And then if you want to go and buy another one, you're not a first-home buyer anymore. You get none of these discounts.
Yeah.
So any chance you get to get the best quality property that's going to have the best chance to appreciate over time, you want to know your options, right? And I guess that's the point I'm trying to get at. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and I think you're right there. I just want to, I think what we should have said right at the start, and I just want to throw it in and be really loud about it, is you're asking people to explore options outside of the limits of these schemes and grants and concessions within their financial capabilities. So we're not talking about stretching yourself financially. You're potentially saying, look, if someone could borrow and service comfortably $950,000, but they want to limit themselves to $900,000 just to get the stamp duty concession, you're encouraging them to sort of take that part out of the equation and look at all of the options. So we're saying do this within your financial capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just realized too, I'm using a term of like outside the scheme. The pro rata reduction in stamp duty is part of the scheme. Yeah. Like, the scheme is no stamp duty to this amount, and a massive reduction that slowly gets smaller up to another amount. Just most people are only, look, no fault of your own. How would you know?
Fixated on it, don't they?
Yeah, because all you hear people talk about is this part of the scheme, no stamp duty, and forget that there's this whole other part of the scheme which may suit you awesomely. Because again, I'm talking to people about property all the time, right? And I've genuinely never had anyone say to me, look, do you know what the big mistake I made was? When we bought a property 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I should have bought one for less. Should have got a lesser property, Like that was a big mistake I made. I'm sure there's people out there that could say that, right? But I've never, ever heard it. That's true. But I hear a lot of people say, we could have got approved for more and we hadn't up to pop, but we were a bit nervous. We weren't sure. That's right. That house that we were looking at, my God, I wish we'd bought that one. Like,
yeah,
I hear that all the time.
Well.
It's like, now we can't afford it. Or, so again, none of this is to say, oh, you should just spend more money or go. It's going back to your introduction at the start. Know your options. You're great. If you're buying a property, you're greater, and you can make the best decision that's right for you.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this $600,000 in particular is spoken about a lot. Mm-hmm. And, when you talk to investor circles, that's a figure that investors use as well.
Yeah.
And so what you find, everybody is trying to buy under that price point. No wonder first home buyers are often complaining that investors are pricing them out. It's like, because you're all fighting over in the same pond, right? So there's a bigger pond over there and it's got fewer fish in it. And hang on, more fish, fewer fish. But anyway.
I don't know that analogy. No.
The analogy's not working.
No.
It is. You're trying to fish in a big pond where a lot of people are trying to fish at the same time, and there's less fish than people fishing.
There's more fish in that bigger pond.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess we're saying go a little bit upstream, and you might catch a bigger fish or catch it quick. To put it,
there's less competition potentially in the slightly higher price ranges. I'm just going to break it down, guys.
Yep.
We're not fishing, we're buying metaphors.
But this is the thing too, and I remember Eliza Owen actually did if she's at CoreLogic, she did a bit of research on this some years back, and I remember what it was looking at these first home buyer grants and the caps, so that the price at which, you get totally free stamp duty, and also there's other price caps on other grants as well, of course. Yeah. And the sort of the values that get squished up until that cap. So say for argument's sake, we're talking 600,000. That means that anything that was worth 550 then suddenly becomes really competitive as people are trying to stay under that cap or fight for it, which pushes the prices of those, what should be worth 550 all of a sudden sells at 570, 580, 590. And the value that you get at 600,000 diminishes, whereas you go over, say 20 grand over or something like that, and you can see that there's this real it's a real bottleneck on what you get for your money. So you can get a lot more for that, proportionately for that extra, say 20 or 50,000 that you go over that threshold. All of a sudden you're actually getting a lot better type of property. And, obviously you can go 100, even more so, but you are getting a more substantial property that might actually last you longer, and you can save in transaction costs down the track. Like there's actually bigger, longer term savings to be had rather than trying to squish yourself under the threshold where everybody else is also trying to do the same thing. So that's what we're talking about here, right?
Well, there's along that track, there's a few reasons I say to clients that you want to be aware of this. And some of them actually, I'll be interested because you'll know better than me, because I kind of see the outcome and you see a little bit more of the whole picture. So being aware of the real costs of going over those thresholds, right? Whether it's, okay, if I go, being aware of it does a few things. One, if there's a property you really like, and we'll just keep using 600,000 for Victoria. Obviously, New South Wales is 800 and Queensland is 700. But you're on the other bit. Often everyone's trying to fight for those, right? And I've had plenty of people lose properties. They're like, yeah, it got to 600. That was our limit. We dropped out, right? And they're like, did you really like the property? Why don't you offer 601? Because I guarantee a lot of people would have been like you and gone, oh, it's gone past 600. And the stamp duty would probably be like a couple of $100. So in one sense, understanding what really happens at that level could just allow you to negotiate better and get the property you want. So it doesn't have to be 630, 650 or whatever. It could just be because it was worth it to you.
6.5.
Yeah, you were happy to pay the extra $500 or whatever. So now you know, right? Another thing is that it will let you potentially get a better property that you weren't, you just thought, oh, I can't buy something for that much. Well, yes, you can if you've got that little bit extra. So you get a better property. And the other one, which I certainly notice, and you might too, we were talking about that fight with investors. The clients I've got that, we have that conversation, and instead of getting a pre-approval to purchase for 600, we get a pre-approval to maybe purchase for 650, right? Like I always like to go deliberately high, and then they might have been like trying to find a property for 600,000 for like 2 or 3 months, just keep missing out. All of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, they bought a property for 620 that they love. It was way better than the ones they were looking at for 600. Everyone's happy. So yeah, it can also just help you get in quicker. But do you see that someone trying to buy right on that mark, that it can sometimes end up taking forever?
But we also have, like in our buyers agency businesses, and I'm sure that, Megan, you've got something similar, and we don't necessarily work for many first home buyers, and certainly in Sydney, then they're not buying under the threshold anyway. So that's not a conversation we have with our buyers agency clients. However, we do have them come to us and say, well, look, this is how much money I want to spend on a property. And it's like, well, that's great, but you can't get what you want for that money. And they're like, but that's all I want to spend, and that's fine. So let's look at, compromises. Let's look at what suburb we change suburbs so that you can stay under your threshold. Or will you look for a less renovated property, or one without parking, or one with one less bedroom, or whatever it is? What are you prepared to forego so that you can stay under your threshold? But while we're doing that, it's a bit like our where to buy process. So if you want to go through this process yourself, we teach it in the where to buy tutorial. But while we're doing that, we'll also show you how much more money you need for the perfect property according to your requirements. And, sometimes they're like, oh, right. So it might be only in Sydney terms, there might be an extra $250,000, for example. That's not much in Sydney money. So, let's just put this in context, but it can be different amounts, different areas. And they're actually able to finance that. They just didn't want to. It felt too dangerous or too risky. But when you pointed out that actually you're going to be buying in an area that you don't want to be in, or you're going to be buying a property that doesn't have everything you want in it, but you can actually afford to get what you want, you just need to get financed for more. And so often they're going to go to pre-approval at the lower limit because it felt safe to them. And what we always say is go back to your broker, get the pre-approval for a limit that you can afford, that doesn't, it might not feel safe, but it's not dangerous. We don't want you going out where you can't, it's unaffordable, but our perceptions of what's affordable versus actually what is affordable can often differ, can be around about our risk tolerance and how much debt we've used to carrying versus what's comfortable. But when we look at it again, we might not have to spend all of that $250,000, for example, but it's there and available should that absolute perfect property come up. And if they haven't gone through that process, they're trying to scrabble after the event, and they'll lose a competitive advantage if we do find that perfect property. So it's a really important process to go through, and a broker should be asking you these questions to stretch you, because they like you say, Andrew, the order taker broker is a bit like the order taker buyer's agent. I want one of them. All right, I was going to find you one of them. They don't actually go,
I want a 3-bedroom house in that suburb for this month.
Yeah.
Okay, here you go.
Is there a better? Tell me about your longer term plans. Tell me about what else you've got in mind. Tell me about where your kids are going to go to school. Have you got kids? Tell me about that, because that might make a huge difference in terms of what the right solution for you is and what the right property you should be going for. So I guess that's what we're talking about here. It's pulling out a bit.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what's risky and expensive: buying a property and then realizing you don't like it, you're not happy there, and a couple of and 2 years later you're trying to like sell it and buy what you should have bought. Now that happens. Life throws up all kinds of things that you can never have zero risk, right? But you just you want to think these things through before you make the decision. It's like how you were saying, you were using the term for the right property or the perfect property, the dream home. Everyone has different ways of going for it. So I think you can have, this is how much I'm planning to spend, and you can do all your research. But one of the reasons I always advise people, look, let's get the pre-approval for more than that. And sometimes I say, well, why? So if you saw a property that you absolutely loved, would you go that bit extra? And usually the answer is, well, if I really, really loved it and it was perfect, yeah, I would. So great. So we'll put it there. If you find that place, we're ready to go. Because if you don't have it in place and say it's a negotiation that's moving quickly, right? Okay, sometimes you're the only person interested in the property. You got all the time in the world. But if you've got to say, oh, I want to make that offer, let me just go back and get my broker to contact the bank to increase my pre-approval. And someone else is just walking in going, unconditional offer, here's my deposit, signed, you know. And the worst thing is, that's the property that you love the most.
Exactly right. And that's then becomes the one that got away, and then that becomes the impossible benchmark. But also a lot of first home buyers do, when they miss out on a property, I was just in Campfire today talking with one of our students who was saying, that this property was on the market on the Saturday. I went through, the agent said basically he was calling for final offers at 4:00 that same day, and someone came in and bought it. Like, how can they move so quickly? I said, probably because they've been looking for a long time and they were ready, right? And so this is the whole idea that, because he said, oh, I bet it was an investor. And I said, well, it might have been, but it also might have been, it could have been a first home buyer who was ready. It could have been a downside. It could have been any number of people. It's not just investors that move quickly. It's not just upgraders, downsizers. And first home buyers can also move quickly, but they've got to be ready in order to move quickly.
Or they're making decisions without knowing what they're doing and taking very good risks. Well. And I think that's just as important for us to really remind people is, don't just go out and throw unconditional offers because you want to do something quickly or to beat everybody else.
No.
It's about being prepared in the right way. And Andrew, I just want to circle back to, there's I had about 13 attempts at getting into the conversation there. So if I sounded a little bit quiet, so everybody, I apologise. But Andrew, I wanted to circle back. We do a reasonable amount of first home buyers in Brisbane, and they're generally people who come to us with some set notions that have sometimes come from, their mates, or sometimes they've actually come from their parents. And it may be that their parents have said to them, this is your first home, don't stretch yourself. You shouldn't be spending that much on your first home. And we've got to, without being rude or condescending to their parents, we've got to help them unravel that notion that they shouldn't be spending an amount on a home. And I want to circle back to what you said about encouraging people to get pre-approved for more than they think they want to spend, but to get pre-approved for what their financial capabilities are, and then set their limits for themselves below that based on what they learn about the market. Because I think that's the order that you need to do things in, not set a limit, then work out what you can buy, but understand what you can borrow, set your limit, and then look for the property. And you might do a little bit of dancing around that number once you know how much you've got.
Look, that's such a great way of phrasing it, because what I see, certainly in my industry, and I think across the property, mortgage thing in general, is a lot of people are so scared to say anything that might be interpreted as advice, where someone will come back later and say, hey, you said I should borrow this much and now I'm not happy with it and I'm going to the ombudsman to make a complaint about you, or like you.
Yeah, well, that's another side of it.
Yeah, so there's a bit, almost an art, like there's, it's part voodoo, part science, a lot of the things we do, but finding a way to tell people what you think, right? Because I know when I talk to an expert, my first question is usually like, what would you do if you were me, right? but it actually get people, oh, I can only just tell you how much you can borrow, or all these sorts of things. So we have to give people some credit that they can make their own decisions. And yeah, if you have to explain in a way that is clearly saying, hey, I can't tell the future. I don't know anything. Sorry, I don't know anything. But what I often say to people is, if we're talking about which bank should you get your mortgage with, should it be variable or fixed, or things like, and I'm saying this, and someone else is telling you something else, you should probably listen to me. But if you don't want to listen to me, it's okay. I'll still do what you want, but you should probably listen to me. And if I'm trying to tell you how to sign the contract and your conveyancer is telling you that's a bad clause, then you should listen to them, right? So here's my take on what you were saying, all right? And I'm kind of saying that to cover myself, that this is my opinion. It's a way of looking at it, which some people might relate to, some people won't. Again, we take it. So when you're looking to buy your first home, generally you're younger and your career is probably like earlier on in your career. So I think taking a mortgage with repayments that are maybe like closer to or at the limit where it is maybe like slightly uncomfortable, I think you can make a case for that to be definitely something worth considering, because your income is probably going to go. And people know themselves where their career's at. And it could be that this mortgage that started off feeling a bit tight, a year later you get a pay rise, you become the manager somewhere, and all of a sudden it's easy peasy. And you're looking back and going, damn it, I would have liked to have bought that better house a year ago, Al, you know. So you want to think about all of these things, and it's very individual, right? But and even at the moment, I can't tell the future, but we're historically, interest rates are a bit higher than normal. So the repayments you have now over the course of the mortgage, sometimes they'll be higher than this, but most of the time they'll probably be lower than what you're starting at. So if you start off with something that's affordable, but it's kind of on the edge, history would say that is probably going to change. And again, you look back and go, that property was worth buying. Again, I'm not saying like just go out and go your maximum, but these are the kind of things you just want to like think about.
They're conversations, aren't they, Andrew? They're conversations to have. And I think, you know, what I get out of what you're saying there is you can't tell people what to do, right? A buyer's agent should not tell somebody what to do. No. A conveyancer should not tell somebody what to do. We have a philosophy in our business, which is we advise, you decide. So we're drawing on our experience, as I'm sure you do, and we're drawing on the experiences of others that we've had interactions with, that we've purchased for, that may have bought 20 years ago, and we're drawing on those experiences to share with people who haven't had those experiences, to give them some information for them to make decisions on. And I think that's where a really, really good advisor really positions themselves. It's not do this because I think it's the right way to go. It's this is what I've collected over my years of experience. What do they say? Genius is only a collection of experiences, or experience. Anyway, something like that. Another thing that we should probably not put in there, but we always mix our metaphors and analogies. But it is just us as you know, us in our way of choosing quality assets. Veronica and I, we have our sets of experiences that we can draw on to guide people and give them information. But you'll never hear anyone, Veronica, you tell me if I'm wrong, but you'll never hear anyone in my business say, buy that property because it is the best one for you.
No, and you can't, because it's a bit like getting married, really, isn't it? It's like there's always someone else. But yeah,
no, you've got to stop fishing in that pond when you get married, Veronica.
You got to make a decision ultimately if that's what you want in life, right? I think so. What we're talking about, we just sum up where we got to so far. I mean, basically, they're foregoing a grant, maybe 10 or 15 grand, to buy a better quality asset that's going to last you longer, that is going to be somewhere you're happier in for longer as well. You know, you can put a good case for it, particularly if you actually are more fearful of a mortgage because you haven't got one yet, than you will be when you have got it, because then we get used to it. But also because we're in a situation where interest rates are now, we've completed a hike cycle and we're going to start on a downward cycle. And in fact, in this hike cycle, I think we got just slightly above the 10-year average or something like that. So interest rates will go up and down. Your repayments will go up and down over the life of owning a property. However, we're actually in an environment now where they're more likely to go down for a period of time in the near future than go up. Whereas when everyone was piling into the market in 2021, when interest rates were tiny and no one's thinking about them going up, you know, we're in a situation now where actually it's sort of less risky than it was back then. A question for you, Andrew. Why do you think people get so hung up on these grants and incentives? You know, why are they sort of stuck on that rather than thinking about the bigger picture, do you think?
I think it's what people are hearing in the media, because and not even trying to smash the media. They've got 30 seconds to put a story on the news and things like that. So they don't have time to go into the nuance of it. and fully explain it. So I think that's mostly it, because it's easy to just say 800,000, 700,000, no stamp duty, because that sounds great, right? But I think
because everyone knows stamp duty is expensive,
Yeah, and I think the idea of I'm getting away with not paying the government something. It's the same with the first homeowners grant, and I think I've said this to you before. It is great. Like, all of these government schemes have such similar names. It is so confusing.
I know.
I have to check, but not so much anymore. But I definitely used to have a lot of people going like, "Hey, and I want to get the government grant, so I'm going to buy a new house." And it's like, whoa, slow down. Like, if you want to buy a new house because that's what you want and it's in the area you want, go for it. But if you're doing it like to get $7,000 or $10,000 from the government, let's take a big step back and think about that.
Yeah. Yes. It's the opportunity cost is what you're talking about, isn't it? That in order to take that little bit of free money, I'm foregoing something a hell of a lot bigger, but you haven't sort of sat down to work that out.
Yeah, there's something just about getting something from the government that I think people want, where if you look at like the bigger picture is like, where am I trying to get to and what's the best way to do it, often involves those government schemes. Some of them are great, right? Not against them, but you don't want to just put the blinkers on and just rush.
Don't let them be the guide to the property decisions that you make. I think it's also, there's a little bit of influence as well that comes externally from a variety of different sources, and that is, why would you not take free money? And I think that's for some people is something they need to, really think about and overcome, because free money isn't necessarily money that makes money. And what you want to do with a property is have a property that over the long term, however long you're in there, it is growing at least in line with other properties or where you want to step up to in the future, or exceeding the growth of those similar properties. So if you're taking a little bit of what you think is free money and it holds you back from the capital growth that you might have otherwise experienced if you hadn't taken that free money, then it could cost you potentially, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 over a period of time of lost capital growth. And if it's a property that you're living in, that also is almost free money. Your money has been working for you in an investment sense, but when you sell a property that you've lived in, it's capital gains tax free. So you're not going to be paying the government on that piece that you get in terms of growth.
So I love hearing you say that, and I'll give you this is something I say to clients when I'm talking about this, and I'd be interested if you say something similar, mainly so I can steal it off you and also say new people. But buying, for most people, the first home they buy will not be the one they live in until they die, right?
Will not be their forever home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the tricky thing with it is you're trying to buy a property that you're happy to live in for a period of time, a year or two for it. So you're trying to buy a home you're happy to live in a location you're living in, but you're also getting an investment because at some point you're either going to want to sell it, take the money to buy the next property, or you're going to want to borrow money against it to do like buy an investment. But at some point, the value of the property is important when you buy it, when you want to borrow money against it, or when you want to sell it. In between, not that big a deal. But at some point, it is. And so what you purchase, you also try like, is it going to go up well in value?
Yeah. What you buy is important, and capital growth matters. It's one of our Home Buyer Academy principles. Could be number 7, actually, of our 13 principles. Capital growth matters. Even if it's your home that you're living in, you still have to have an investment mindset to a degree. And, I've heard buyer's agents say you can't get both. You can't get, a house and an investment grade property. I'm sorry, but you actually can. And it's about thinking
it's rubbish.
Thinking properly about what are the drivers of growth in the area that you're buying in, and are you keeping an eye on that? So by all means have that emotional response to a property, but really keep, what is this property going to do for me over the period of time that I'm going to own it? I would suggest that 1 or 2 years is not a period of time that you hold a property. It's a longer term investment than that. But you're right. The value doesn't matter except for when you buy it, when you want to use it as leverage or equity to do something else, and when you sell it. They're the 3 main points.
And I guess what's hard is when you're looking to buy your first property, you're so focused on that. Like, it's exciting, it's a bit terrifying. So I get that it is really hard to like look 5 years down the track or 10 years down the track. It's really difficult because it's not what you're interested in. But if you're able to, just a little bit look forward and realize that one day the value of this property is going to really matter, which does kind of tie in a little bit to if you can get that little bit better property, a bit better value, that over 10 years could be $100,000.
Works harder for you.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, with every sort of incremental increase in the average, yearly growth, that actually exponentially translates into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, we went through this in our episode about compounding, that capital growth is so important for lots of reasons, and you just talked about some of them. But I always say it because it gives you options. If you ever had a property that did not grow very much in value, you've got a hell of a lot less options in terms of upgrading, downside, everything, borrowing against it for investing, whatever. You just do not have the same options as somebody who's gone and bought something that they know is going to perform better than other properties. And I get that it's an inexact science, but this is why we go on about A, B, and C grade properties, because an A grade asset will appreciate at a greater rate, which means that gives you better options down the track. And the other thing too is that, capital growth is so important, but also the period of time, as Megan just said, we don't focus on buying a property for 2 years. In fact, really 5 years. When you do the stepping stone strategy, you need to be looking sort of around about 5 years, but you need to be very, very careful because you can equally get it wrong in 5 years. Markets don't always swing in your favour. We prefer to say, look at 10 years. But that's not always possible, particularly for first home buyers. And so the important thing there is making sure that you do get a property that has got all the elements in place to give you the best possible chance of performing better than the other choices that are available to you. And these are really important things to learn. And so, and that comes down to as well, if you are forcing yourself underneath a cap so that you qualify for a grant. That's when, missing out on, say, a $15,000 grant can cost you big time because you might be buying an asset that just isn't going to go up in value at the same rate, or you sell it really fast, which means you're losing heaps in transaction costs. Or, like you might avoid spending, money renovating that you then have to spend at some point of time because you've bought under that threshold. So there's a lot of different ways that having the conversation with the broker can open up your mind to those other opportunities that may not cost you. That saving is a false saving, I guess, or that grant is a false saving.
I would say probably about 70% of the people who contact me who have owned their first home already and they're looking at upgrading to maybe a bigger family home or something. And the first thing I'll ask is, can we do it, but still keep our first home now as an investment property, right? And most of the time, if I have to say, look, no, you can't, it will be because it hadn't gone up in value enough. Sometimes it's you don't earn enough money in that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an eye opener.
But because a lot of people they want to, and if it's a good property, why wouldn't you want to keep it? Like if you've done your research and been careful about it and picked a good property, and you again options, right? Maybe it's like hey, you can keep it and buy what you want. You can do them both, and you may decide no. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah.
But you want to know, is it possible? And if it's gone up in, but even if you decide not to keep it, the more it's gone up in value, the more profit you're going to make, and the smaller mortgage you're going to have on the next property. Like it all matters. Everything matters.
It does. All right. So we're talking about thinking outside the square here. We're talking about, the conventional wisdom is grab every grant you can get, stay under the threshold, whereas we're saying don't think conventionally, please think a little bit bigger than that. So I guess if you've got some, can we summarize it into some top tips for first home buyers, Andrew?
Sure. So be aware of all the government schemes, but also ask the question, what if I go a little bit more? Like, what would that look like? How much would the stamp duty be? So know that so that then you can...
It might not be as much as they think. And I think that's what we've really learnt today from you. It may not be that much.
But look, I've got clients who we've gone through those options and they've gone and bought a place for $590 because that suited them.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, I'm not your mum. You pick what's going to. Well,
Also, your mum shouldn't choose your asset for you. Let's just.
No, even we don't. You know, we say we're the mums, you know, but like we're here to help. We'll guide you. We will tell you if we're going to buy a loan.
Back on track, Andrew.
yeah. So that is that's the main thrust of what we're talking about today. But the advice I give all my clients, right, and this will sound like I'm sucking up to you guys here, but I truly believe it, right, is that if you're looking to purchase your first home, so there's lots of it. You've got to organise finance, buy a property, get a conveyance, and all these things you've got to do, right? But as far as where should your energy and time be going, it should be overwhelmingly into the property, researching property, doing courses like the one that you guys like, that how to price a property. I think that's still free. I don't know how you guys get
it. Is free.
Like, because that is the number one thing.
Invaluable, but it's
like people always say to me, like, I don't know how much to pay. Like the agents say this and this and this. Like, it's so confusing, right? That is where you want to be, like, become an absolute nerd of looking at properties, what's been selling, going, you know, doing, like, investing in courses and educating yourself. And it should be just, you know, maybe like 5% of your time is making sure, like, the mortgage broker's done or whoever you did has done the loan right, and you've picked out a conveyancer and stuff like that. All things aren't equal. They're all important, but they are not equal at all. All right. So I really want to put that message across. I think they're the main things.
Can I summarise what I've heard? Because I think there's some really key points that you've made throughout this, and I just hope that everybody's picked it up. And the first is to work out your true borrowing power, not just what will fit into the scheme. So really understand, what can you borrow? Ask really good questions and open your mind. You can make a different decision once you've got that information. The second is to look at the numbers. Compare what you've saved with the scheme versus what you might gain by actually going over it slightly. Less competition, maybe a higher quality property for less money because you're not competing as much, more negotiating power. There's a lot in there. And importantly, talk to your broker. And if you're involving a buyer's agent, talk to them at this point as well, so that you can look at both the financial side and the property quality perspectives. Because, someone who knows a market really well can tell you, well, for $590, you're going to get this. For $630, you're going to get this. I'm going to send you off to, 4 properties to have a look at things that have sold. And you come back to me and tell me, you've got borrowing capacity of $660. Where do you feel now that you've seen these things in the flesh and you really understand? The third thing that I've taken away from our conversation, Andrew, is to talk to your broker really early. You can look at both the financial side. If you're using a buyer's agent, talk to them early too about the options within your financial capabilities, not just within the limit you've set you. And when you're going to choose a broker, I think it's really, really important that if the first thing they say to you is, all right, let's look at the grants and incentives and concessions we can get you, they may not be the kind of broker who's going to have open conversations with you to challenge your thinking, to get you to think outside that square. And the final takeaway that I've really picked up out of this is to look for that long-term value, a better located, more livable property. It could grow faster in value. It could give you more options down the track, and it could actually serve you longer.
Yeah, I'm saying, look, financially, going that, like, it's not my money. It's the, people who are borrowing, it's their money. But in the context of a mortgage, going 10, 20, 30,000 over, really very little difference. Your repayments hardly move. The amount of cash you've got to put in barely moves. So again, you make
that
your
might
decision.
make all the difference. And I guess that's the thing. If you don't look, you will never know. It's a bit like people who are only trying to buy brand new so they can get those grants, and they never look at the established property around and see whether they get better value or not, because they're just not looking. And I think that's really what we're talking about here is work with your broker, have those good conversations, and then look at the options, because you might be surprised at really how much more value you could get for not a lot more. So look, Andrew, these are great insights. We really appreciate your time, and obviously they absolutely align with our philosophy. We don't we are always saying, don't let a grant dictate your buying decisions. Use it if it helps, but always keep your eye on the real prize, which is a quality first home that grows with you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Excellent. All on the same page. And that's why we like working with you, Andrew. We've said it before. It's not about getting into the market. It's about getting in well. And sometimes it means thinking a little bit differently. Andrew, we have one question that we always ask our guests. And that is, what is one thing you know now that you wish you knew as a first home buyer?
Ooh.
We didn't prep you, did we?
No, that's okay. I'm going to be very indecisive answering questions, but I was only hesitating because it's going to sound like I'm just like backing up everything I just said. But gee, look, it would have been to look at the best property I could have got. First home is a 2-bedroom apartment in Adelaide. This will make young people sick. $130,000. 25 years ago, or maybe.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. But 100% at the time, but we could have bought a 3-bedroom house in Adelaide.
Right.
But I was worried about, taking on a mortgage and borrowing too much and everything. And, I'd probably have a couple of $100,000 more in the bank right now if I had. So yeah, that's what I would go back and tell myself when I was buying that first time. But that's just me. That was my.
I have a similar story, and I won't reiterate it now. Go back in those past episodes where I tell my story, but a very similar story, what I learned as a first home buyer, but I didn't learn it until years later when I was no longer a first home buyer.
But that's why we like to share these things with our listeners. Our audience gets value from what we share as our past experience and our mistakes. And I think I love this part because everybody has something different that they learn from their journey. And when you learn it before you take your journey, you've got so much more to benefit from. And Andrew, that's such a good one. Even though you're in the mortgage broking industry and you're in this every day, that's the one thing that you wish that you'd had a little bit more confidence around.
Yeah, well, I think that I'm not sure if you're doing it on purpose, but like quoting Warren Buffett, there's a great saying of, learn from your mistakes. What's even better, learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, 100%.
Looks like use that.
Yeah. Learn from our mistakes. Don't make the mistakes we made. Now, look, thank you so much for joining us today, Andrew. And for anyone listening, if this has got you thinking, speak to your broker and buyer's agent about what your best strategy looks like. If you're using a buyer's agent, we know not everyone can afford a buyer's agent, which is why we put the course together, but we really encourage you all to use a broker. And obviously, Andrew is one of our brokers on our panel. You can access those brokers on our website. Go to the resources section. And don't forget, we've got a full online course that walks you through all of this and more. So check out the link in the show notes.
Too many first home buyers are leaving money on the table and hurting their future selves because they don't know how to do things in the right order. That's what we do. We teach you the exact steps you need to take and support you along the way.
We help you move from a state of information overload to feeling excited and in control. You'll learn a clear step-by-step process that takes the guesswork out of buying your first home. You will know exactly what to look for, who to talk to, and how to navigate every stage with confidence, avoiding costly rookie mistakes along the way.
We've created your First Home Buyer Guide, a 10-module self-paced course plus online mentoring with us. The course only costs $990 and you get direct access to us every week. You can share the link of any property you're thinking of buying and we can help you work out whether it's an A, B or C grade property or an absolute no-go zone. We even help guide you through your negotiations. Trust me, you'll buy a lot better with our guidance and you'll overpay by an awful lot more than just the cost of the course if you don't know what you're doing.
Thanks for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to join our Facebook group. It's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions, which we answer, meaning you can be sure you're not going to get led down the garden path. We hope to meet you soon.